Hansel and Gretel the Witch Hunters is an awesome, fantastical action film directed by Tom Mercola and was released January 25th, 2013. As mentioned before, this film is an action film set in a very dark fantasy world with very comedic elements to the likes of old Sam Raimi films and Peter Jackson films. And the main cast of this film is Gemma Arterton as Gretel, Jeremy Renner as Hansel, and Famke Janssen as the evil Grand Witch Muriel. This movie is a lot of fun. I dig it overall. I think this is a criminally underrated film, definitely cult film status. A lot of the critics, I think, treated it very unfairly in its opening year, and I think this movie really needs to be reevaluated by critics. I think most critics were just looking at it as, honestly, I don't know how they were looking at it. I don't know if they were even watching the same movie I was, because when I saw this movie, all I can see is roughly 2 hours or so of nothing but just pure fun. And it's not, I wouldn't even downgrade it to turning your brain off kind of fun. It's none of that. This is actually a very witty, very well thought out film that I just think people need to try out if they haven't, or if they had and they didn't like it, they need to go back with a new pair of lenses and just take it for what it is. Take it at face value. But not even that. That's another downgrade in itself. The movie has a lot to offer, and it doesn't get credited enough. Without further ado, I'm about to tell you exactly why you should give this film another chance if you hated it, and why you should try this film out if you haven't even seen it. Welcome to Shoney Judgment, and this is my movie review of Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters. Be ready to be judged.
I see you got my invitation.
Hansel and Gretel the Witch Hunters is, well, about Hansel and Gretel, but this time they're witch hunters. This movie is more of a hypothetical of what happened to these characters, like where did they end up after that fairy tale? So basically Tom Mercola just took the opportunity to create this fantastical world of futuristic style weapons that also seemed more in a time period of fantasy and, old school, like that, the way people used to live in that time period. This setting he created is awesome. That is a key thing I want to talk about this story, is the setting was really cool. The premise that it builds off of this fairy tale of Hansel and Gretel is something I never would have thought I wanted to see. And in this fantasy world, Hansel and Gretel are witch hunters, like bounty hunters. And they are bounty hunters, they are bounty hunters, but they hunt witches. Make some money, they make a living, but it falls into their character arc of they're very hateful and prejudiced to these witches because of their past with witches. It was just another interesting way to say, here's another fantasy enemy, witches. I have yet to see another movie like that where the main enemy is witches, to the likes of zombies or vampires. That was cool. That was a cool idea. So that's another thumbs up to this movie, is a new, fresh take on the subject matter.
When I was a kid, the witch made me eat so much candy I got sick. Something happened to me. I have to take this injection every few hours or else I die.
Hansel, he basically has magical diabetes because he was forced to eat all this candy by the witch to fatten him up, but it gave him diabetes, basically. And I think that was a cool addition to this story, because that makes so much sense. Like, you force someone to eat so much candy, it kind of makes sense they become diabetic. Mina brings out a freaking Gatling gun in a fantasy movie like this in this time frame. I thought that was super cool, and the sound effects of it, so cool. Then the action starts, I have to talk about this too. Anyone who has seen my Batman Begins review, I love the movie overall. I gave it a 9 out of 10, and I still stand by that. The thing that detracts it from being a 10 was the heavy editing and the shaky cams and just overly edited scenes. And I still stand by that. That still annoys me about Batman Begins. Here, though, you have a situation where Hansel and Gretel is heavily edited. It 100% is heavily edited, but there's no shaky cams. And honestly, even though the edits can be annoying, weirdly enough, the action in this movie is really fun to watch. And I think it's because there's no shaky cams this time. Goddamn shaky cams, man. They are the bane of my existence. I swear to God.
Swear to me!
But no, seriously, every movie I see with shaky cams, that is always the thing that ruins the action scenes when it happens. But this movie is heavily edited. There's no shaky cams. Not that I remember. I think I even read somewhere that Tom Ricola kept that in mind. Tom Ricola, the director, the man himself, he even said he was trying to go a more retro way of filming this movie. And he wanted to make it feel like it's a product of the 80s, I think, because he was heavily inspired by Sam Raimi, Army of Darkness, and the Evil Dead movies, where they were a dark horror film franchise, but also comedy at the same time.
Lady, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave the store.
Who the hell are you?
Name's Ash. Housewares.
That's what this movie is. It's dark fantasy horror, action, blood and guts, and comedy all mixed in one package. And it's great. It's a formula that we don't see enough of. This movie was funny and it is charming. And again, like it doesn't take itself seriously. Like I said, you don't need to turn your brain off to enjoy it. Just it's a good movie, just of a different kind. If you think you know what movies are, you have to tell yourself you don't and just watch it. I love polarizing directors that challenge the norm, like Zack Snyder and Sam Raimi. And now you can add this man to the list, Tom Ricola. George Lucas is probably the greatest of this example, where they have polarizing visions that challenge the normal way of thinking of how film should be.
How worried are you that the critics are not going to like this new movie?
Oh, I'm not worried at all. They haven't liked any of them, really. And they especially haven't liked the last two. So,
well, exactly.
Hey, it can't get any worse.
Yeah, but come on. I mean, when they go after your writing, your directing, it has to hurt.
Oh, it always hurts.
It has to hurt.
It hurts a great deal. But part of making movies is you get attacked, and sometimes in very personal ways.
Did you not say ever to yourself, well, maybe they had a point with this or with that?
The point is, it's like if you paint your house white, and somebody comes along, well, that should be a greenhouse. Well, fine, but I wanted to paint it white. I don't think there's anything wrong with painting it white. I don't think there's anything wrong with me for painting it white. Maybe it should be a greenhouse. But I didn't want it to be a greenhouse. I wanted it to be a White House.
Gretel's character arc in this movie is she's basically the brains of the organization. She is a strong female character done right, I might add, where she is strong, she can take care of herself, but she's also vulnerable, as all main characters should be. Every human in the world is vulnerable. And to make a strong character is not to negate their vulnerability. You have to keep that in there because that's how we viewers relate to the main character, no matter if they're male or female, because we're all vulnerable. We're all vulnerable. And that's how we relate. And so she is strong. She could kick ass. And it's hot, it's sexy, and it's badass, and I love it. But she's also got a vulnerable side. And even though she's a woman and I'm a man, I can still relate to her. That we all have weaknesses and we all have to learn and make mistakes and we all have to be better. And you saw that with her, You also saw it with Hansel's character. And Hansel's character arc is he's more of the loose cannon. He always has Gretel's back. And, he won't let anyone mess with her, but Gretel won't let anyone mess with Hansel. Like, they are a tight-knit brother and sister, and it's really cool to see. I love that brother and sister dynamic. I wish more movies did that, and it was really cool to see here. The story of Hansel and Gretel is really great, but most importantly, the themes. The themes are really great as well, hidden beneath the layers of the story and the action, the blood and guts and humor and everything that makes this story great. Overcoming childhood trauma. That's something that's pretty relatable in the real world. I think pretty much everyone has some sort of childhood trauma, some much greater than others, but it's something that we all can relate, bad things that have happened to us, bad things we have seen. And in this particular movie, I think the childhood trauma that is very relevant to this story is Hansel and Gretel being abandoned by their parents in the woods. And they had no idea what was going on. They didn't know that the townspeople had burned their mother alive and hung their father or in front of their mother's burning corpse. They just were left alone, and then were tempted by a witch and almost eaten and killed a witch, and they were just turned into these badass witch killers. And that is what drove this story, is their childhood trauma, this unresolved childhood trauma. So I think that is a really cool theme to put into this movie. It worked really well. Another theme that was really cool was basically how destructive revenge could be. The old saying, revenge is a dish better served cold type of thing. The revenge part of this is their hatred for witches. Hansel especially has nothing but hate for witches and seemingly no forgiveness. He falls in love with Mina. She is a white witch, a good witch, but he didn't know that because he always believed all witches were evil demons. They're just these evil followers of the devil, nothing good about him. And then when he found out that the woman he was falling in love with was a witch, it created this really complicated narrative. His whole life he wanted revenge on all witches for what they did to them. Not only did he find out that his sister is a witch and that he and his sister are the children of a witch, but the woman he loves is a witch as well. And it's just all overwhelming for him. So I think that theme tied into Hansel's story was very well done. Kudos to Tom Mercola for adding these really badass themes to this really badass story. Then, of course, you've got the same old struggle against evil. Even though you see it in every movie, I don't think it's a bad thing to touch up on it in this particular film. That is very much a basis in this movie, and it's a basis for a lot of fantasy films. And I don't really like to call it cliche because it seems like a downgrade. Just because you see it in other movies doesn't mean you have to complain about it, saying, oh, it's the same in every movie. No, this movie uses that theme to further project the story, along with other themes that I have mentioned. Everything that I have mentioned before, the story, the characterization, the production design, everything mixed with the themes that Tom Mercola embedded into the roots of the story it makes the story just very unique. I'm not saying Hansel and Gretel Witch Hunters is a perfect film. It's not by a long shot, but it's a classic. It's a great movie, and I enjoy watching it. I've seen it like 20 times. Like, come on, this movie has something to say. I didn't really get into Jeremy Renner's legendary performance as Hansel. His performance was great too. Jeremy Renner is really fun to watch in all of his movies. I liked him in Avengers. I liked him in the 2 Mission Impossibles he did. I just think he's brilliant. And one thing I didn't know about him, actually, until I watched this movie and watched some behind the scenes, I didn't realize that he does like 99% of his stunts. And he does. If there is a reel, I can't remember what they call it, but a behind the scenes reel where you could see behind the scenes of the film being shot, and you will see that Jeremy Renner does most of his stunts, and it's insane. And Gemma Arterton did a lot of her stunts too, but I think Tom Mercola, if I recall him saying, he didn't really want Gemma Arterton to do too much of her stunts, but Jeremy Renner Apparently, according to him, there was no telling him no. Jeremy loved throwing himself through walls, and I don't blame Jeremy Renner for doing it. Like, it's all part of acting, and the more that you do as the star, the more authentic and relatable the film becomes. And so I really appreciate Gemma Arterton and Jeremy Renner for doing that. I also appreciate Famke Janssen. Like, she didn't do as many of her stunts, but you could tell when it was her, and she put a lot of effort into it. She also wasn't really allowed to do a lot of her stunts, from my understanding either. Most particularly the broom, when she was flying the broom. It seemed that was stunt double from what I saw. But all in all, I am very pleased with the performances of the casting. No corny acting here, just corny writing. And not a bad corny. That is the aesthetic of this film. That is what this movie is. It's meant to be corny. It's meant to be cheesy and campy and fun. And it pulls that off very, very well. One thing I really appreciate about this movie, I haven't mentioned yet, I don't think, is the practical effects. A lot of times in modern movies, I think more CGI and animated effects is used more. And people could chalk it off to laziness, but I also realized something with this movie is a lot of times they also do it for safety. Because in this movie, they used a lot of practical effects, like people actually throwing themselves through walls and jumping off of high heights, stuff like that. Well, a lot of people get hurt in that, and most particularly, I read about an actual accident that happened in this movie. A female stunt double, I don't know what her name is. This woman who was injured, she threw herself through a wall and got a nail lodged in her skull. So she was critically injured. From my understanding, she survived, but that's a very close call. That is the risk of practical effects. But at the same time, there are stunt doubles that this is what they want to do for a living. They want movies to utilize their skills, and they sign on to this job knowing that there's a risk that they could die. But this is what they like to do for a living. And it's cool, it's fun, it's also dangerous. And you could take all the safety precautions you want, but there's always a risk, like that poor woman who got critically injured. And I'm thankful that she did not die. But that is the risk you take. However, the reward of taking that risk is the movie now feels very authentic, where you are doing these practical effects where you have these witches flying a broom, but they're actually on the broom on a wire, and using sophisticated techniques and tight coordination, it looks like an actual witch flying on a broom, and it's all real. And then you use CGI to polish it just to make it that much more crispy. And that is excellent stunt work. That is excellent production design. Let's talk about Augsburg. Augsburg was an actual built set. It was filmed at a studio in Germany, but the sets are still really beautiful and really professionally made. I truly felt like I was in a fantasy town, in a dark fantasy world, being in this town, being in these woods, being in the witch's cave, being in that area where the Sabbath was being held, and the witch's house in the beginning and the end. They did so well just pulling off the aesthetic, the look, the feel, the atmosphere of this humorous, dark fantasy world. I love Tom Mercola's vision for film, and I want to see that in more movies. I want him to keep going, and I hope no one gets in his way. The soundtrack was pretty amazing too. Atleo Varson is the one who composed the soundtrack for this film, and boy, did it really open the door for this dark fantasy atmosphere that Tom Mercola was trying to generate through this film. One memorable song was actually the opening credits theme. One thing I loved about the opening credits after Hansel Gretel killed the witch in the house is the opening credits was like this paper drawn type, opening, which I always love it when movies do that. If any of you have played Resident Evil Village, the video game, they did the same thing in the beginning of that game. It was like this paper cut type animated intro. And I don't know, I like the aesthetic of that. I think it'd be cool to watch an entire movie like that, but even when they just do like little scenes like that, I believe Harry Potter even did something like that. Harry Potter Deathly Hallows Part 1, where you just have like this, it looks like paper art intro. You know what I'm talking about when you see the beginning of Hansel Gretel. You know what I'm talking about. But the main theme of Hansel and Gretel just made that I was super stoked to further see what was in this movie the first time I watched Hansel and Gretel the Witch Hunters. I'll never forget it. The soundtrack definitely hooked me and immersed me into this dark fantasy world, and I love it. So hats off to Atleo Varson. Sorry if I butchered your name, sir. I need to further discuss that there are two versions of this film that I have personally seen. I'm not sure if there's another one, but from my understanding, there's only two cuts of this film. You got the theatrical cut, and then you got the unrated cut that has 10 minutes of extra footage. I will say both cuts are good versions of the film. If all you have access to is the theatrical cut, don't feel like you're being held back. You'll at least have a fun time. But I will say the unrated cut, if you can get your hands on it, that's the one you want. The 10 minutes of extra footage is stuff that should have never been cut out in the first place. I'm pretty sure Paramount Pictures, it almost seemed like they're at first they were trying to make the movie into a PG-13 rating, and it seemed that Tom Ricola and his team were fighting tooth and nail to keep it at an R rating because it would ruin the overall feel and themes of the movie. You know, the whole point is to be dark and overly violent, and so instead it seemed Paramount removed these 10 minutes of footage to make the film less violent, because these 10 minutes of extra footage does make it more violent. The theatrical cut didn't have the scene where the kid that the witches kidnapped was brutally murdered by the witches. It is dark. It is very disturbing, but that is what this movie is meant to be. It's meant to be a dark, disturbing, fantasy, horror type action film with comedy mixed into it. Think Sam Raimi, again, Evil Dead, Army of Darkness. That is totally what the aim of this movie was meant to be. And the unrated cut is the much better version. Not only that, there was some scenes they added that just made things more clear. For instance, I think the biggest scene that I was happy that they put in there was Mina's extra scene at the end. So Mina dies at the end trying to help Hansel defeat Muriel, the main villain. And Muriel stabs her and kills her. In the theatrical cut, as Mina is dying in Hansel's arms, she says, "I tried to stop her," and then Hansel says, "You did good," and then she dies. I thought that was kind of cheap. I thought, for someone who is Hansel's lover, there should have been a bit more. And in this extra scene they added, as she's dying, she said, "I tried to stop her, Hansel." Hansel says, "You did good." And then the scene they added right after that was, "Do me one favor, kill the and then she dies, and then Hansel, does this last battle for her, and then Gretel comes in and helps her brother, and together the witch hunters defeat the main villain. It's not perfect. I still wish there was more with Mina's story. There should have been a scene, honestly, where Hansel was giving Mina a proper burial. Instead, the movie ends just leaving her lay and just pretending like it didn't happen, even in the unrated cut. Like I said, the movie is not perfect. The theatrical cut of Hansel and Gretel the Witch Hunters gets a 7 out of 10. It is a very good movie. It's got issues, like I said. It's got way too much content cut out is its biggest issue. But the stuff that was left there is still a fun ride. I still think you guys are going to enjoy it. If that's the only version of the movie you can get your hands on, I think you guys will still have a fun time with this movie. But I still recommend that you guys get a hold of the unrated cut. The unrated cut of this film gets a solid 8 out of 10. The extra 10 minutes of footage elevate this movie, and even though it's still not perfect, I had already mentioned what I wish could have been done more. I still think that the movie, even though it's corny in the fun way and the corniness is its saving grace, it's still annoying enough where it's like, you know, maybe they could have added more to make it more grounded while also being over the top. You know, it's definitely possible to make a movie that's grounded yet over the top. Instead, it was a little bit grounded and more over the top, but not over the top in a bad way. It just so happens to be that type of over the top where it stops being a 9 or a 10. And then, like I said, I just still think there should have been more with Mina. There should have been a better send-off for her. She had a better send-off in the unrated cut, but it's the equivalent of the Mass Effect 3 ending when they added the extra cutscenes at the end after the backlash of the original cut of Mass Effect 3. It was better, but it was still not the best. That is pretty much all my problems with this movie. Overall, I enjoy it. 7 out of 10 for theatrical cut, 8 out of 10 for the unrated cut. If you guys haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend you check this out.
That was awesome.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Please like and subscribe. I will see you next time. Be ready to be judged.